All right, welcome everyone. This is Katie Bergloff, and I'm doing an interview today with Richard Watson, who's a tuba player. He's going to introduce himself here in a second. We're starting a couple of minutes early, so if you're joining us here in a couple of minutes, just know that we have a comment section open, and feel free to leave any questions. Say hello. We'd love to hear from you. Also, this video will be available afterwards online, and you can rewatch it if you didn't get to catch it today. And then please post any questions afterwards if you didn't join too. We'd love to see that. Also, it can inbox me as well too. So I actually met Richard through one of the former interviews that I did with Warren Deck. He had commented in it that he knew Warren, and so for a long time I've been wanting to interview him, but it's been a couple of years since I've been able to do live talk. So I'm really happy to have him here. So welcome, Richard. I'm so happy to have you. I hope you're having a good day so far.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie, for this opportunity. And welcome everyone. I'm going to be talking about my specific experiences and how I fell into this and how I've recovered from it. As we all know, this condition is multifaceted. Most of what I'm going to deal with does not have anything to do with actual nerve or tissue damage, but I suppose you could classify it as psychological sabotage, ways that we find to interfere with our ability to make the product that we want, and how if you keep that up, you can go right down the rabbit hole and wonder, how did I get here? Which is exactly what happened to me. It doesn't happen overnight. Takes place gradually, so that a few months later you try to play things that you've been able to play easily before, and they just don't sound like anything at all. So I hope that everybody can find something that they can align with and resonate with, and I can try to help them. Over the screen, I'm not a big fan of as far as that goes. I did my share of online lessons when we had the pandemic and everybody was home, and I had to try to give lessons with a half a second delay. It's not my preferred thing, but Katie, I suppose, is it okay to share my email, at some point, like at the end?
Yeah, of course.
So if people want to ask me directly about things, you can email me.
Yeah, I definitely can.
Yeah.
Also, you guys, I'm going to be posting some links in the comment section that Richard is going to give me afterwards, and I'll post them in there if you want some more information on previous talks that he's done
Yeah.
over tuba playing. Also, Richard, for those who are watching right now, I was wondering if you could do a brief kind of introduction of yourself. Like, how did you get into music? Like, what were your roots? And then did you go to school for it? Did you study it? Who did you study with? That maybe that's a little too broad, but just a little bit of background on what you've done
Okay.
so far.
I'll try to keep it down to a half an hour. Well, I'll start with what I do currently. I live in La Porte, Indiana. I'm a freelancer around the area. My longest jobs have been professor of tuba euphonium and trombone once upon a time. At Valparaiso University, I play in the Port Symphony. We just finished our 50th season with all sorts of cool stuff, like having our pictures up in downtown La Porte in Michigan City, just like athletes do, which is really cool. People recognize me from those things driving around. I also play in an R&B band called Together. I actually get to play tuba in it sometimes. I also play trombone mostly. You can look up on YouTube Together Music Band Indiana and watch a video that we made and enjoy that. I grew up in Deschler, Ohio, which is 45 minutes south of Toledo, southwest of Toledo. And we had in our little school, we had an outstanding music program to start with. We had a wonderful teacher named Tony Roberts, who got me started in the 5th grade on trombone. After previously having done the usual song flute thing. I went to euphonium in the 7th grade, and in the 8th grade, I made the switch to tuba. In 8th grade, I was playing in the high school band because it's all one building. So Out of the population, student population of 200 people, 9 through 12, there were about 70 people in the band at that point in time. So that was a great experience from the start. I moved to Friendly High School later on. Probably more people know where Friendly is than Desher for sure. After I graduated from there, I went to Michigan, was in a 5-year program called WIN-C. Eventually, I had the great fortune to have Abe Torchinsky retire from the Philadelphia Orchestra and come and teach over there. And himself and also my experience playing in the All-American College Marching Band at Disneyland between my junior and first senior years, completely transformative. Mr. T transformed my career so that in the lessons, we would do a lot of talking, but we talked about how this goes, how the conductor, how these different conductors did things. So by the time I graduated, without having experience, I had experience, if you know what I mean. And I was able to win my first audition right after that for the Honolulu Symphony. So I played there, was on the roster from 1975 to 88. Had a fantastic time. I found the place where I needed to be. But it's also the place where, after having spent a fantastic summer with a wonderful 2-hour lesson from Mr. Jacobs, I was ready to take on the world. My playing had never been so solid. It was fantastic. But little did I know that about 6 months later, I was going to be completely the opposite. So subsequently, I took a year off to go get a master's at Northwestern, which I did. I came back, and for reasons that I'll probably get a chance to explain, it didn't take. And I was still kind of in the same mess that I was, even though I played a recital. And it went, reasonably well, but I was nowhere near the kind of bulletproof situation that I'm approaching now. Things are much, much, much more solid now than they were then. But at the time, you're in this whirlpool of horror as far as being able to produce music on your chosen instruments. And many of those who are watching this probably are familiar with that. Why is this happening to me? What happened? What can I do about it? Boy, this is awful. I hope to address those kind of things. It didn't just start then either. I can recount a previous bout with probably something like it, although through sheer will, I was able to keep playing and be able to produce. But
Yeah,
that
I was
probably was more the start of things before it really, years. This was during school. In fact, my freshman year, things went from being a natural player to somebody who thinks. And then, well, when you get into college, you have to think about things, and that sometimes thinking is bad.
Yeah, we kind of
Yeah.
had a previous conversation about this before
Yes.
we started this live talk. And Richard and I were talking about how we both kind of experienced going through the onset of focal embouchure dystonia, and I was telling you about my schooling and like how and this is also a lot of research done on musicians with dystonia. A lot of them are natural players, and then there's some type of like kind of wrench thrown in the mix. And I really loved Richard when you were talking to me beforehand a couple days ago, and you likened it to I can't remember, it's like an engine running, and then you just
Oh,
kind of
it
yeah.
was you have a racing engine, you're trying to get the very, very most out of it. And that kind of is analogous to professional players, because we're always trying to get that extra little bit. And you tweak it just a little bit more, and then the engine blows up. So
Yeah,
it doesn't blow up immediately, it blows up with kind of in slow motion. But yeah, it truly becomes, and this is a common phrase, paralysis by analysis. That's something that can cover a lot of things, but I can be more specific about it a little bit later.
yeah. And when we do get dystonia, the onset, it is like you said, it's very confusing.
Yeah.
And I know you were saying like back then, like no one I mean, no one talked about it when I got it either, but I mean, back then it was probably even worse. Like there's probably like it was probably wasn't even a term or even a
Well,
disorder.
I like to say I got it before it was popular.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but it didn't seem like recent years, it seems like a lot of people have come out of the woodwork now that it's kind of known. I had no idea that it was had a name or anything. I just knew that my playing really stunk and I was getting dirty looks.
Oh,
That's hard to take.
it is. And
Yeah.
when you were going through it and I was just thinking, I was like, being tuba player in the orchestra, you're the only, person in your section. I mean, besides
Mm,
being part of the low brass, but it's like
yeah.
you hold a lot of responsibility being the single player in the
Yeah.
orchestra. So it's like, and you have that foundation to it too. So it's like, I mean, just the psychological pressures of dealing with Embouchure Dystonia while you're experiencing it's just very confusing. Did
Having,
you
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask if you did like what kind of all of us usually do, which is like we try to, practice it out of us. We're like, oh, I just need to practice a
All
little
right.
more.
Well, here's that. By the way, what I was going to say is I have heard some recordings that I'm on when I was in full dystonia, like Bruckner Fifth, and you can't tell by listening to the recording. Again, through sheer will, I was able to put out the sound. I suppose if you're sitting right next to me, you could see little things like I'm sure a lot of people can relate that the note, the attack is delayed, the response is delayed, something like that. But I found that really remarkable because I know I was having big problems, and yet you cannot tell from listening to them. I go figure, through sheer will, I suppose. Anyway, I'm sorry, repeat your question again. Oh, practicing out stuff. Okay, here's my statement. One of the big truths that I learned from doing this, I wish one of the things that I wish I'd known then that I know now, and that is just because something didn't work doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. All right. I was completely changing, if you will, my functional hard drive as far as tuba playing like 4 or 5 times a day in a desperate attempt to find something that I could make a noise with that was sort of credible. Uh, I'm going to get into some more about this, but self-forgiveness has a lot to do with recovery. That means uh, when you're on the road to recovery, if you got to give yourself some time to do this away from the pressures of trying to be not wrong, and that's another poisonous thing. You want to try to be successful. You want to add success rather than subtract failure. As all of us know who have been through school music programs, and I'm talking about public school, that sort of thing, there's, even though it's not necessarily promoted this way, there's a lot of trying to play not wrong. Don't want to make the band director mad, don't want to make the judges mad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And boy, does this set up a whole lot of really bad precedent, especially if you have the misfortune to kind of stumble into this particular rose bush. All right. So when you have the time and none of the pressures, you're just focusing on yourself. I mean, if an athlete is injured, they put him in the IR for a while. I mean, you're going to ruin your hamstring and then go out and run a sprint the next week because it's going to get worse. And they spend a lot of money in these athletes and they're pretty much worthless. So if you think of it that way, you're not going to get right back to play football if you got a hamstring issue. All right. So
I completely agree
it's,
with you there.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
and I like into musicians even with dystonia or injured. We are a lot like athletes, and I think a huge part of like addressing like recovery is getting in that mindset of I have an injury or I have dystonia. But it's so hard for some of us to accept like right away because for some people the dystonia might start off like quite mild, and they're like, well, I think it's something that I can just, improve upon. It's not that I'm because a lot of people want to hesitate from going into that idea that they need to take time off or they need to take time away
Yeah,
to address
well, it's
this.
more pressure on themselves and
Hmm.
makes it worse.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is you need to have, you can still have high standards, but uh, much simpler expectations because you are injured. And I'm talking about psychological sabotage, not actual, muscle injury or nerve damage or like that. That would take somebody who knows a lot more about those kind of things. But there are plenty of us who have talked ourselves out of successful performance. So that's mainly the what I'm addressing here. That's my deal. Uh, you're still a musician. I mean, at the height of this, I had so much music, wonderful music swirling around in my head, and I couldn't play any of it. So annoying, just so annoying. Uh, so simpler goals. I may have mentioned to you the other night that, well, one of the sort of blessings in disguise in sort of a bizarre way is that, uh, well, you've embarrassed yourself so much that what's the difference? If you're by yourself and you're trying to play these sounds, you want to be self-supportive instead of beat on yourself all the time, which is something a lot of us do anyway. And that's not conducive to recovery from this. So when I was able to actually make a sound that sounded good and it actually started on time, that was a real that was a great feeling, fantastic feeling. And then you try to make some more. The forgiveness part is you're going to have to suffer through a lot of junk, or at least what you consider junk, until a pattern's established of more and more success. That's why you want to focus on success and away from subtracting failure, like when you're in a so-called high pressure job. Uh, people get all bent out of shape because they cracked the note. Well, you know what? When either you can't make a sound at all, or the notes are cracked all over the place or have a delayed response, again, how much more embarrassed could you get? You don't need to do it to yourself. You need to get to someplace and just start trying to make sounds. And it's really important. Like I used to get from room 428, Fine Arts Building, Chicago, Illinois, Mr. Jacobs' studio. I used to get that. But you need to forgive yourself a lot and allow yourself to celebrate when stuff sounds the way you want it to. And eventually, after some time, it'll actually come out the way you want when you think of it. But I'll tell you what, if you're going to analyze anything, analyze what the product is. I call it the what, and avoid analyzing the how, because I'll put you right back in the rabbit hole. Awareness of what your muscles are doing, what your air is doing. And this is one thing that Roger Rocco really got me over. My first lesson with him, and that's when I really started the second time, is when I really started to get back into it. He said, today is your liberation day. And I found out just how simple it was. I didn't have to worry about air or embouchure or breathing too much, except to take enough air. And it just really simplified things and put me on the path of more and more success. So like I'm doing it now. So that's that part of it. Did you want me to talk about when I first encountered it when I was in school?
Yeah, I would love that because
Okay.
a lot of us have a tendency to, when we're looking back, it's like, wow, I think I might have like experience with fragments of what they would call neurological like degradation or a form of it like in the past.
Hmm. Okay. So I'm a freshman at Michigan, and Harvey Phillips comes up and does a clinic. And during this, and by the way, this is kind of a recurring pattern. He was talking about how there are some people have a different embouchure for different ranges. And then as a natural player, you don't really think about it, you just play stuff. When I was in the 5th grade, I just sort of imitated some of the big band stuff we had in the record player, the first trombone parts, and I just got high notes and whatever, just imitated what they did to playing that in the 5th grade. But then I thought about, I wonder if I'm one of those people. So I started kind of like holding my mouth, because Harvey Phillips said, now, by the way, Harvey Phillips has zero to do with any of this stuff. The recurring theme is the way that I took the information and used it. This also happened with Mr. Jacobs. And I think that when I was trying to produce for him, even when I was the most screwed up when I was at Northwestern, I didn't give myself time to do what I do now, which is the delayed assessment, let the thing happen first and then compare that to the sound you're trying to make and then try to make that sound. I was trying to play not wrong, but I didn't even tell myself about it, but I figured out much later that's probably what I was doing, which is why it didn't really take. And I spent that year at Northwestern and then I came back to more dirty looks. So now I've had the time to develop all that stuff and it's gone really, really great. Things I haven't been able to do in years. Response and the lowest notes on the horn, playing some of these excerpts like fountains, and really being able to crack out the low E on that thing. That's been gone for a while.
I love that, when we had a previous chat, you kind of talked a little bit about certain mindsets that you got in that helped you to recover. For example, one question you asked me, which was really great, which I love that you asked me, was like, do you know the difference between criticism and assessment? And that's such an important thing for musicians who are in
the word is
recovery.
judgment.
Or judgment
And assessment. Yes.
Judgment and assessment.
That's important to know. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, I would ask my students that kind of thing, and whatever, sometimes it's kind of hard to get a response from somebody, but eventually they'll tell me something. I said, okay, here's my definition. Judgment has an emotional component, and assessment is just the facts. So that's why when delayed assessment is, I think many of us get in the habit of trying to prevent mistakes from happening, which is really, really poisonous. But I think it does a lot in people that are in the throes of dystonia. As Mr. Jacobs would say, manipulation of the meat, that is the lips and all that kind of stuff. You have no business doing that, even though there's plenty of people that say, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. Because your brain has two sections. It has the conscious brain and subconscious brain. Conscious brain comes up with the ideas and sends it down to the assembly line guys and they build the car. But when the manager who used to be on the assembly line decides he wants to get his hand dirty again and goes down and meanwhile they've streamlined and improved their process and he's doing it from 10 years ago and it screws everything up, grinds to a halt. They just want him to get out of there so they can resume the streamlined function that they had before that. So if you try to make your lips a certain way, you can do it, but it just takes way, way, way longer. And it brings up the possibility that if something doesn't feel right, it's a huge distraction and it'll cause a panic reaction, at least momentary anyway. So you may have to be a little bit more patient with yourself and let it develop in a quality way over time. It has to be the sound in your brain going through the mechanism and playing in the right sound. It might not happen immediately. This is one reason I don't trust myself doing exercises. All right. I don't trust myself doing things that I might tend to self-analyze. I don't want to do that. So I just play music. And I play it until things are starting to work the way I want to. In other words, where it's one-to-one. What I intended to play sounds exactly like I wanted it to. So yeah, I may get back to exercises at some point when I can trust myself more, when I can play them more like music instead of like some sort of physical activity. I'm going to have to deal with that on my own. Meanwhile, it's going pretty well.
That's
It's going
great.
fantastic. Yeah.
I like what you said because it reminded me of one of my favorite professors that I had. He really taught me the importance of like imitation, which I mean, of course, when you're a natural player, that's like how you grow and develop, but you love imitating things. And so before I had him, I was with a teacher that was very technical, precise, precision based. So when I got to him, it was kind of a relief because he really got me out of my head of going from the space of like overthinking things to really imitating things. And one really great trick that he did with me, which I mentioned in a lot of videos, is that he had an old record player and I don't know how he did it, but he could record on it. And in lessons he would record himself playing the excerpt, and then he would record me playing the excerpt, and he'd say, just copy me, just try to copy the style. And then he record it during the lesson, and then the next lesson he'd come back and he'd say, okay, I want you to tell me who's playing this excerpt here. Is it you or me? And sometimes I was really shocked because I'd say, that's definitely you. That was like way better. He'd say, no, that was actually you there. And he's like, and it's all imitations because you're not thinking about, because I was so stuck in this phase where I was really trying to learn the romantic era style playing with horn
Yeah.
playing. And I wasn't a very loud player at the time, so I was struggling with learning how to play louder and not as brassy, and I just couldn't understand how to do it. And he was one of the first people to really break past that barrier in a way that helped me, and it was simply by imitation alone. He said, you don't have to think about like, I need to fill my lungs up with more air, even though that helps. He's like, but it's really like, it has to come through your brain first, the ideation, like the idea, the concept has to come through your brain first in order for your body
Yeah.
to match it. He's like, so it
Yeah.
has to be there first in as a
Yeah.
foundation.
So even though it started out with imitating this person, what you're really trying to do is imitate yourself. And by the way, in your imagination, come up with anything. You can just have a synthesizer that makes horn sounds or tuba sounds or whatever it is. You end up, after that little push, you end up imitating yourself. And it'll take a while to trust yourself again, but you're going to do that. You're going to let the feel factor fall by the wayside and stop interfering. By the way, if you're trying to stop anything, you're putting too much energy into it. If you're trying not to do something, oh, that's horrible. Try to do something and stay out of your way enough so that you can get it eventually, and be a little patient, because just because it didn't happen then doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. You just have to be more and more right until it's right enough. We don't hear enough of that sort of thing. We hear, why'd you do that? And sometimes people yell at themselves, by the way, and you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure there's plenty of horn players that you've encountered, and other types too, that they yell at themselves all the time. First of all, isn't music supposed to be fun? Isn't it supposed to be fun? And if you can sound good, at least what you think is good, that would make it even more fun. But if you're yelling at yourself all the time, that's not fun. I told you a couple of stories about stuff that happened to me in school that would be fireable instantly these days. I'm not going to bore people online with this stuff, but yeah, you gotta kind of love yourself a little bit and allow one good sound to turn to more good sounds, turn to more good sounds, and keep trying to make good sounds. And just try to let it happen. You have intent for sure. It's not just thinking, by the way. You have to establish the sound. You have to sing the sound. Neither one of those is the word I wanted to usually say, but you have to, it's not enough to think it. You have to generate it. You have to speak it. You have to sing it. So, well, I can hear it. Well, yeah, but we can't. You got to tell us. So you need to do that. And then that's where the delayed assessment comes in. Instead of trying to put yourself in a chokehold, trying to not make a mistake, You got to play stuff in your own privacy so you don't feel bad. Make all the terrible noises you want to. Sort out the really good ones that you like and just try to keep making those things. And I'm telling you what, after a short time or a longer time, whatever it takes, it's so gratifying that you can actually play stuff. By the way, between the first bout and then the more serious last bout, in my earlier stuff, and this was most of the ways through school, there was none of the delayed attack. Not really. But later on, that was, I can go into that too. When I came back and I started playing stuff, I noticed my attacks were a little bit off. Like, I thought, maybe I should put more air in there. Okay, so more air. Well, I better put more air in there. I kept doing that. After a while, it would just, now this took months. But after a while, there was pressure and no vibration. So that's when the panic started. That's when I started severely doubting myself and trying to find 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, how can I do this? And without any help, right down the rabbit hole, there's nobody with a rope. So
And
yeah, that happened.
I think that's like one of the hardest points to be in when you're experiencing vocal embouchure dystonia, when you all of a sudden is panic mode. And I think, it's so hard to get out of that, to a place where, because I mean, you're basically like, hitting rock bottom, and then you think, well, I sound awful. So like, how do I even start recovering from this when everything I play is repulsive to me? Like it's like you have to get
Yeah,
through that reactionary stage first of like you said, it's like a break. It's like you have this break moment where you put the brakes on
yeah,
everything, you tense up, you start overthinking, because it has to do with the reaction to how you sound, your own self.
yeah. And you have to forgive yourself a whole lot. And in fact, stuff is going to sound, well, this fits into also from room 428. From crudity comes skill. You got to allow yourself to be really crude compared to what you used to be when you were so-called functional. And that crudity will turn into skill. Everybody's done this from time to time. Like if you're learning a song on the radio, it takes you a while to understand what's going on. And, famously, you probably screw up the lyrics until one day you actually get a hold of what they really are. So, oh, that's how it goes. But it comes into a form after a while that's something that sounds right to you, at least, and you just will have fun doing it. But you have to allow for that crudity. Prevention of the crudity is not going to help you, it's going to set you back. By the way, through all this, I could play high notes all day, but I could not play a march because that required a precise, crispy note, and I could not make that with a 2 or 3 second delay on the sound. After I took one more break from Honolulu. I went back to get fixed. So came the time when I was in the orchestra, we'd have audition committees travel to LA, Chicago, New York, which is so much fun. I did 2 of those. It was so great. So this time, I had also been on review committees twice. This time, I'm on the hot seat. I'm being reviewed. So I was supposed to play for them when they showed up in Chicago. A few days before, probably longer before that. I said, there's no way in hell I can play anything for anybody. So I showed up without tuba and just talked to him. And that's when I officially left. Let me tell you, those next 2 weeks or so was unreal. You have an identity, you have a job, there's certain things associated with that. You're known in the music world. And now, who am I? What am I? I am nothing. It felt like I was in this big sensory deprivation champ, just some sort of big old dark room floating in water. wondering, okay, how do I go on from here? So I had to learn how to be a real person and go to work in a bank and do some other things. Let me tell you, that's a huge transformation from all you have to do is sit in the back of the orchestra and only relate to your fellow musicians, go home and practice and come back, do the same thing. So during this time, I sold all my instruments except one. I kept one of my tubas. And we're in an apartment in Evanston. There's a basement, like a storage area. So I had it down there about every couple, 3 months. I'd say, okay, I'll go down and play stuff. And I could play some things. As long as I didn't have to worry about starting a note on time, I could play a lot of stuff. And then I put it away. Another 3 months later, go down to the basement and play again. I remember one of these times, it's fun, Gene Piccone just came to Chicago and he was renting a house in Glenview. I went over there, the Yamaha 620 F1F tuba just came out and he had one. So I said, okay, I got to try this. And I was able to play Crystal Silence on that damn thing. Oh, so I still had the music inside, but now I can actually play stuff no matter what it is. Just a matter of it's the refinements come in there. But boy, that's heavy stuff when your entire being is invested in this identity that kind of manufactured. You acquired it. But yeah,
that must have been really hard.
Well, you can see.
Yeah, and especially, when, and you are at a professional level, so I mean, to be next to, I mean, it's hard enough being next to your peers, but to be next to people who are of the same level and caliber as you, to have to be vulnerable like that, to play in front of them or to explain that, you can't play anymore. That's really difficult.
Well, you can't explain it.
Yeah.
I mean, they can hear that. I told you the thing about my bass trombone player was trying to show me how something goes. I said, I know how it goes. I just can't play it. And it wasn't that hard of a thing, but if you can't start your notes and, yeah, it was bad. It was really bad.
Yeah. That is one of the most difficult things of being injured or having dystonia. But I think with dystonia, it's a lot worse because, the chances of most of us coming back is very slim. And the identity loss is a big deal. I mean, it takes almost all of us through a huge bout of depression, the grieving process, and
that's relevant.
Yeah. And even today, like, I don't know what it's like for you, but I mean, even today for me, it's still a little difficult, even though now I work in an orchestra in administration and I'm around musicians and other people who have studied music and care about it and love it, which I'm so grateful for because it's like I'm somewhat still around my people.
You're
my
in the environment.
community.
Yeah. It makes you feel like a musician.
A little bit, but at the same time, I still miss that community you get when you're on stage, and to feel like you're expressing something together, you're doing something together that's really catches your full potential or your full ability. It's still a little hard every now and then, but I am, like you said, grateful for even just the small accomplishments that you get with Embouchure Dystonia. It is a kind of a blessing in disguise.
It's a really can't think of the word I want. Wonderful and terrible at the same time. Whatever the word for that is. Now I've been able to function for many years now. I started coming back. I told you my session with Rocco. Oh.
Oh, Pat Lugo says hi.
Is that? Oh, hi. It says my battery's running low, except I'm plugged in, or I thought it was.
Oh, your computer?
Yeah. Hold on a second.
That's okay. I'll go ahead and speak a little bit. So
yeah, please do.
So yeah, we were talking.
Oh, you know what? I kicked it out. Good Lord. Okay. All right, go ahead and speak while I fiddle with this thing.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit beforehand a couple days ago about
Mhm.
similar experiences we went through. And what I love that Richard kind of talked to me about was, I in my case, I really was I felt like I was like at the height of my playing, and I was getting ready for graduate school auditions, and I was playing a lot more than I usually do, but also because I was going to a very small school, and I was one of the very few performance majors in my studio. I was being kinda overworked to a sense. At the time, it didn't feel like being overworked because, when you can play and play and play, you don't really know that you're overworking yourself sometimes, and it's kinda like that analogy you made with the engine. It's like you can rev it up, and then you just wanna tweak it just a little bit more, and then you go a little too far, and it's kinda like that, but, it's more like your whole nervous system reacts rather than just your
Yeah,
embouchure. It's like
and
everything. You're
and may I say that, especially if you're thinking about your embouchure, and feeling that and pounding it harder. See, I can play. I might get physically tired, but my mouth doesn't get tired. And even if it does, it's a few seconds later, it's fine. But if you let your brain do the work, then there's really not that much tiredness, except for the kind of like total physical or kind of weariness when you've been playing for 3 or 4 hours. Um, so I think there's something to. I mean, it takes a lot of thinking to control all this stuff that has to do with controlling the lips and all that stuff. Again, you can do it, but it takes a lot more work, and some people that can't handle this, that it makes them anxious. And music is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to be happy with what you're doing instead of. This is one thing that Rocco told me. Encountered like for example, a trombone student who could play on the mouthpiece just fine. He took in the trombone and he's bringing the trombone up to his lips and is shaking. The trombone had become literally an instrument of terror to this guy. He had physical reaction. He didn't want to play it. It has baggage, terrible baggage. I think he was able to get over it at some point. I don't remember what Roger was telling me about that. I do remember that stayed with me, that there's so much fear and baggage and everything, that and apprehension that is involved with these things. These instruments become animate objects. They're metal and wood and stuff and whatever, but it's part of your soul. When it's working great, it's a great extension of it. And when they have that adversarial relationship, when every time you want to put it to your lips, you start shaking, like you're pushing and pulling yourself at the same time. Well, that can't be any fun at all. So yeah, it's no fun.
yeah,
I never
the
had anything quite like that, but
Yeah, well, yeah, and you're completely right. Like the reactionary part of it is such a huge component for people to come over to get over in their
mhm.
recovery process, and some don't. Some still really struggle with
Yeah.
it. Um,
Well, I was dumb enough to keep doing it for pushing for it. Well, here we are. Finally works.
so you've learned a lot from Arnold Jacobs and also how come I'm forgetting his name now?
Roger
Um,
Rocco.
yes. Um,
Mhm.
do you feel there's certain concepts from their teaching that you've applied to your recovery process?
Yeah. Um, these are things that I've kind of like reformulated uh, in my own words, but I've been talking about some of them. The establishment of right. Establish what's right rather than correct what's wrong. Especially when you're in these kind of higher profile kind of situations, you don't want to play wrong. So you're trying to play not wrong, even though you're much better at handling it. But even so, uh, inevitably it might fall off. That even you're not superhuman enough to hold it all the way through. um, Here's another thing uh, that basically it can sound good even if it feels bad. One of the panic reactions is, especially people that are worried about their mouth, is if it feels funny, then you assuming that bad stuff will come out, but that's not the case. And also part of it's not exactly the delayed assessment, but the sound, the product is the most important thing. Only people making a living off of talking about embouchures cares about any of that stuff. If somebody's walking by and you're sounding good, maybe not to you, but externally you do. They don't know if you're having problems. Well, I'll tell you what, the recording of Bruckner 5 I was listening to, I swear to God, I was having trouble making a sound on that thing, but boy, it sure sounded good. At least from a distance, you know, kind of like the car you're going to buy. Looks good from a distance. You get up, you see all the scratches. Let's see. From Roger Rocco. Feel equals fail. Roger also had this. Now he would be I don't know if you've ever interviewed him, have you?
No, I haven't.
He's on Tuba People TV and it's fantastic stuff, but you've never done that. So maybe you should try to set one of those things up too, because he was my predecessor in Honolulu. And he had been subbing for Mr. Jacobs. He was playing second to him. And he's on a number of recordings from that particular time period, late 60s, early 70s. And then he got that job. And stuff like that happened to him too. But not there. He had gone to sub in Seattle for 1 year. And I don't remember how it got started, but things started to fall off. And eventually he had to take off from that and go back to Chicago, as he put it, with his tail between his legs. All this time, he could play on the mouthpiece all the time. But again, like I referred to a few minutes ago, get on the tuba and it's a whole new set of baggage. Well, there's got to be some sort of connection with that. He talks about the key in the lock. And this is what I was talking about, that he simplified for me. I didn't have to worry about air metering and what my lips felt like and all that kind of stuff. All I needed to know was be able to vibrate a sound. Oh, by the way, as an aside. So at the time when I was in the full throes of this stuff, I'm driving limos around O'Hare. I have a mouthpiece with me, but I tried to play it once in a while, and it was so tied up, like I was tying my own self up, and I couldn't even do anything. I could barely get a sound out of the thing from all this conflict, from trying to play and then trying to suck back in. And you try to make a sound and then suck it back in at the same time. You'll see what I mean. It's nuts. When I was able to get some sort of vibration, even if I didn't think it was very stable like that, I discovered that if you do the catalyst vibration, that is the sound you come out of your mouthpiece, and if it matches what the instrument wants, then you have the key in the lock, and that's all you need. So you're just starting to find those things. He also told me, after he told me this is your liberation day, another concept he talked about is that there's always this monster, and he'd go to his piano and kind of bang on the low like that, that if you allow it to, it'll come back. So the thing to do is to keep focusing on how you sound so the monster will stay away. Focus on what's successful rather than trying not to be unsuccessful. So those are some things there. As far as the wind goes, just take enough air, fill up your lungs as most as you can comfortably so you have that reserve. He's got a chart that measures airflow with capacity, the percentage of capacity. After halfway, it drops like a rock. Now, I don't know if you can remember back to your probably started in 6th grade or something, did you? Something like that. Most people start around 5th, 6th grade. Did you ever have any mouthpiece contests? You know what I mean by a mouthpiece contest?
No, not necessarily.
Hey, Johnny. So we have all the brass players. We got the trumpets down to the tubas and whatever, with the mouthpiece differences. Hey, kids, let's see who can hold the note the longest on the mouthpiece. Well, who's going to lose? we don't want to lose. So here's the tuba player going like that and holding that thing out. And then I have 2 years of damage control to try to get him to sound like a tuba again. Band directors, please. No, don't do this. We got big mouthpieces and little ones. Who's going to win? You want to have a good sound of what you have. Please, please, enough with this. Use your diaphragm. Enough. Here's Mr. Jacobs. Suction from the lips, blowing from the lips. But this becomes absorbed in the sound and you don't really think about it. You just do this stuff, as I call, offline. Practice this stuff offline and then go play. Like Charlie Parker says, forget all that junk and just go play. And there's the rest of what you can look up. The song and wind stuff everybody knows about. I think that, well, here's something from me. Air is not music. And I think that I tried to use it as music, and that's one thing that led me down the rabbit hole. Vibration is, wind is only a means to an end. It's the same kind of thing like I told you I teach Arnold Jacobs for motorcycles, teach motorcycle classes. And instead of when they're first starting out, try to ride the thing 100 feet and the engine sounds like that. Okay. Some people who don't have my training say, well, keep your throttle hand steady. Well, even if you think you're doing something with the control, in other words, with your mouth and whatever, doesn't mean it's going to work. But you're convinced that it is, even though it's not. That's really nuts, but it happens. So I just tell them, listen to the sound of your engine that you're making, smooth it out, smooth it going up and then smooth going down. Listen to that. It takes your mind away from the physical process, which is automatically locked in. If the product sounds good and it's easy to do, that's it. After that, it's just a matter of making it more consistent, be able to do it the way you want it to, how you want it to sound from time after time, until it just becomes what you do. So those are just a few of things that I can think of right at the moment, some little pearls of wisdom. But the product is the most important part, that what you sound like. What you look like means nothing, at least to me and lots of other people, compared to what you sound like. Somebody's walking by and there's not a window, they can't see that you're standing on your head while you're playing the trumpet and it still sounds good. Okay, fine. It worked. Mr. Jacobs would make these weird embouchure shapes in a buzz ring, it gets still buzz. As long as you get a what was it he said? A bad sound can be turned into good, silence can't. So you got to start making even a crappy sound, because you can make a better sound maybe within a very short time. Just make a sound of some sort and let it get better. Allow it to get better. Stay away from self-interference. Just let it go. Try to make it sound. Yeah.
I love that. It reminds me of, like, and I think this speaks to the impact of sound to us as musicians, because when
that's where we get the entertainment from.
Yeah.
When
I tried to first start recovering, I was kind of shocked at like how critical I was of my sound in recovery. And so, for example, like when I started recovery, I tried to go to a practice room just to, try to figure out what's going on. And I found myself completely focused on like who's walking by, who's looking through the window, who's
terrible distraction,
staring at me. And then I thought, how do I overcome this reaction and just get used to accepting my sound, whether somebody's walking by or not? So I started off by just like covering the window, and I would just play and I would try to, and I literally had to internally tell myself, like almost like pep talk myself and say, like, I don't care what people think. I don't care that I sound this way. I don't care. Like I'm, and I had to reteach myself, like from the ground up mentally, how to accept the way I sounded, and then slowly take off the thing from the window. And even with my horn playing, it's like I couldn't play my horn right away. I had to play with a straight mute in the bell because for some reason, like you said, some things do a certain trick to you, and it could be even like just listening. Right?
That's a good distraction.
Mm-hmm.
There are other distractions like worrying about people walking by. That's a good distraction. Or as Rocco would put it, doing something strange. Kind of shake things up a little bit, making it have, getting you out of, like you've used this phrase, getting out of yourself. And by the way, we just said you have to actually believe it, which you started to. At
Yeah.
first you didn't believe yourself, but then you started to believe it.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
literally was like mantras. Like I wrote a list of mantras that I had to repeat to myself just to get to a mental state where I could just practice by myself. Cause it's weird. It's like even if you're practicing in your house all alone, you're like, can my neighbors hear me? What if like, God forbid,
Yeah.
like a squirrel
Yeah.
hear me
That's
outside?
a
It sounds so
terrible,
awful.
that's a terrible state of mind. Terrible
Yeah.
state. You can't do anything. You're putting yourself in this little tiny box. You can't do anything. Nothing will satisfy you. So yeah, you got to be comfortable. You got to be
Yeah.
comfortable and don't care. You don't care.
Yeah, I always bring up David Krabel's he used to be principal horn at San Francisco Symphony. He does the creative not caring.
Ah, that's
Methods.
fantastic.
Yeah, creative not caring. And I love that. I always
Yeah.
always tell that to myself. I'm just creative not
Yeah,
caring.
that's excellent. I've learned something now. Is that something is that just a statement? Is that something you can read about?
He, I've never studied with him. Maybe some of his students know more about it, but he did this album where he did just excerpts alone. And in that excerpt album, that's where he talks a lot about his creative not caring when he's playing through the excerpts. And so that's where I kind of learned it from, was that recording.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's such a hard process to get to that point because we're just trained to think a certain way as musicians, and
Yep.
to get out of that after so many years, it's just very difficult. It's very difficult.
Yep. Tell me about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think also like I've also had to use, and I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me it was both a psychological like recovery, but also or psychological like going through those reactionary things, but also um physically too. So it's like I had to switch my mouthpiece, and I had to try little tricks like playing with a mute, playing off my leg or on my leg, or
Or creating strange situations.
yeah, exactly.
That's what Roger's talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great that you came up with this stuff on your own, that you weren't so addled with this stuff that you couldn't think about anything or just go, woe was me all the time. Right?
Yeah.
You actually kept thinking about a solution.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like you said, and I talk a lot about this too in the videos, is that it's important to find those little areas of leverage. So it's like maybe you can play like, let's say an F, and the F still has dystonia. It's like you still wobble a lot, but it's not to the point where it's completely uncontrollable. But it's like, can you get to a point where you can accept that and then work with that, just that one little F, and say, okay, I can embrace this sound. It's wobbly, but I can embrace this one note. It's fine. And then keep working on it slowly, not only accepting it like mentally and psychologically, but accepting it physically too, to allow your body to work in that gray area where it's wobbly, but sometimes it isn't, and kind of finding ways to work with it and trick it. And it's kind of like, for me, it's a lot like I always liken it to a coiled spring. It's like you can't unwrap a coiled spring right away, or it's just going to snap back. It's like you have to slowly, iron it out one little bit at a time. And you have to have the patience to do that too. Yeah.
That's a word.
Yeah. Well, Richard, I've been so happy to have you here today, and you gave so much good advice, and I hope that everybody watching really enjoyed it. There's been so many people watching here, and you'll probably see when I replay the video all the hearts and the likes flying by. But I'm so happy to have you on here, and I hope to have you on here again as well. And I'm sorry that it took so long to get you on here too.
But it's the right time.
Yeah.
I'm in a really good space right now with that. I would just plan for like a half an hour or so before I came on here. and even just starting out, like I said, I don't do exercises. I don't really warm up, except I do play on my mouthpiece a little, just to kind of establish the sound and the range, and then it gets on the tuba and it just starts to work. And even though stuff is maybe a little fuzzy, it gets to where it roars a little bit. So I have an audition coming up in a month.
That's awesome.
I'm older than most people on here, but my star is ascending right now. And it's something fairly local. It's within easy driving distance of here. And hey, more money and playing better stuff too. This orchestra is playing, like, apparently they're playing the entire Romeo and Juliet ballet, Prokofiev, which I did with the San Francisco Ballet when they came to Honolulu years ago. The tuba part is at least 44 pages long.
Oh my
And
goodness.
lots of melody for those of you familiar. So I would love to not only make us a decent amount of money and a good suburban for service orchestra, but play. I think last time I saw them, they played Mahler second. I don't get to do that in La Porte. We do good things, though. The orchestra is coming along very nicely, but we don't have that scope just yet. But that would be really good. Then I could start to have the career, recreate something of the career that I used to have. That I thought I was marching straight to the top, and then a little something came along the way and said, yeah, not so much. So, and here we are.
Well, I'm really
And
proud of you.
yeah, appreciate that. And you know what? Especially for like that last half hour, it's just you and me. I've been focused on it's just us having a conversation. It just so happens there's a bunch of people looking in, but I wasn't even aware of that. You know, we're having a conversation and bringing out stuff, and I'm bringing out stuff in you. And what a great endeavor that you've come up with and addressed this increasingly relevant and as we all know, painful process. But I think it's probably good for people to know about some success stories instead of all the woe is me stuff that all of us are familiar with. There can be a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's helpful to know how to get there. But I'm there. I'm there.
And I'm so proud of you for being there. And I completely agree. I think that it's important to hear success
Yeah.
stories too.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of us need like that inspiration, especially when it comes to dystonia. I mean, it's just a hard thing to navigate.
The way that you are connected to what you are and what you do, it's a little scary when it's taken away from you and you have to be a real person. That adjustment is just, talk about being knocked off the top of the mountain. Hard. Being knocked hard off the top of the mountain. Feeling every boulder and every tree that you run into on your way to the bottom of it. It's yeah. It's rough. But not now.
I commend you for everything you've gone through and for as far as you've
Thank
gotten too. It is such a huge step to play in an orchestra again. And I mean, just to get to that point to not only be psychologically ready, but physically too, after,
Yeah.
just trying for so long to get to a point to be able to. I mean, for some of us, it takes, like for
I'm
me, it took 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. It's longer than that. Confident. I'm confident. Almost like, yeah, I got this. And I do. No matter what happens in this audition, I will definitely give them something to listen to. They will definitely have something to listen to. And I think I have something to bring. So I haven't had that kind of confidence in quite a while. By the way, I've gotten some of that from playing with Together all the time. When you play shows in front of people all the time, if you crack a note, but just keep playing and they still keep dancing, who cares? And the band sounds awfully good sometimes. It sounds really good. And get a lot of accolades for all that stuff in real time. So that really helps the whole thing. And this orchestra stuff is just another form of music. That's all it is. I'm going to treat this like a gig. I got these, the gig involves playing all these pieces of music, little bits and pieces of things. That's it. I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to lay down my sounds and see how it turns out.
I love that. I love the mindset
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
attitude and everything. So,
Yeah. That's
all right.
great.
So thank you, everyone. Oh, Becky Proke says this is good to hear. Ali says thank you so much for this video. It's been really helpful.
Hope
We have
so.
a bunch of people that are watching here. So thank
My
you guys.
email address.
Oh, yes, I will add that on there. Actually, can you say it out loud for us? Is
I'm
that
going
okay?
to. Yeah, I plan on it. Okay. Ready? All right. Tuba Biker 52 at yahoo.com.
Yahoo.com.
Yep. Tuba like I play, biker like I ride.
As all one word, Tuba Biker
Yes.
52.
Yes.
Okay.
Tuba Biker 52 at yahoo.com.
Okay. Okay, you guys, I typed that into the comment section for you. So if you do want to email Richard, feel free to if you have any questions afterwards.
That's right.
And for those of you who commented, thank you so much. And I'll also post some more links in the comment section afterwards that are to some of Richard's previous interviews or talks. Okay, perfect. So thank you, Richard, so much. I know I say this is an hour-long chat, but it always feels like it's so short because there's so much to go over. But I'm really glad to have you here. And I thank you a lot from the bottom of my heart because it means a lot for well,
Likewise.
not just me, but the community, especially musicians with dystonia, to hear from you. So
well, this is the right time because I'm still development is ongoing. Not only playing, but the concept. Another sort of blessing is that I've had almost every kind of screwed up that you can be. So I recognize it and I know how to get people out of it if that happens. So my teaching is far better than it was. My Hawaii people, one of them is a world famous cosmetic dentist. He's fantastic. But he reminded me of some of our lessons earlier, like when he was in the 8th and 9th grade or whatever. And I don't teach like that anymore. But, you know, when you're young and full of it, you know, you have all the intensity. But now I'm a lot more thoughtful about stuff. And I also know that if they can't play, it's not my fault, but I can show them ways to do that. I have to get them out of themselves first, like you were talking about. Boy. Yeah, that's, I hope, I think it was presented fairly clearly. And did you think so?
yeah, I definitely do. Yeah.
Because
I think
I can stumble over myself a lot, but I don't think I did much.
no, you did explain a lot. And I think, you know, especially for musicians who don't have dystonia, it's, you know, it's hard to describe some of these concepts, but I think a lot of them get it because especially with tuba playing, I think, you know, because you guys have Arnold Jacobs as such a great thought leader and musician, and he has always been kind of along those lines of thinking outside the box, thinking out the traditional form and presentation of playing. So
it's the combination of being an amateur physiologist, and he was able to research it so that he knew the stimulus response thing very well. I could get, as you said, the mind to trick the body into doing what it was and stay out of the way. And so that was extremely valuable. My thing with him was I was still trying to play not wrong. And so I interfered with my own development. It wasn't until years later I wanted to sort that stuff out, let everything stream like it's supposed to, instead of overanalyze it, get in the way. You know, so.
well, I'm so grateful for everything you said. And I always feel like, I'm not trying to be biased, but I feel like tuba players always had the best mindset. I said I feel like tuba players have the best mindset when it comes to recovery.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, Warren's really holding his own too. Uh, there's all that music stored up in there. And I told you before, I think that he's probably one of the ones that tweaked his engine a little bit too much.
Yeah, he was
Thinking about them.
fantastic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And he still plays in the when he works at the University of Denver, he still plays in their, I can't remember if it's like their brass group or their faculty
Oh, so
group.
he does play in Denver?
He does, but mainly in the faculty group, I think. He doesn't do outside
At
stuff, I
DU.
don't think. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I've heard from people who were like, they're like, we still specifically sought him out as a teacher, whether he has dystonia or not. It's like we
Yeah.
still value him as everybody still thinks of him as a musician. And I mean, I think it's nice.
I'm seeing our little, got the video up
Oh yeah.
a little bit.
So yeah, and I was just gonna say really quickly before I go, I value the conversation so much because I mean, I haven't ever mentioned this before, but before I got Embouchure Dystonia, I was planning on going to graduate school at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, and I was going to study with Thomas Jocelyn, who was the former assistant principal of the New York Philharmonic, and we became really good friends. And he is one of the first professors I visited for graduate school auditions, and he was had this completely different mindset than other teachers that I had in the past, and of course, he had studied with Arnold Jacobs, even as a horn player, and he loves Arnold Jacobs. And so when I got dystonia, he was one of the first people to really, even though he had never dealt with dystonia, he really was so supportive and kept encouraging kind of these concepts that got me out of my head and out of overthinking things. And I just always loved that. And he was such tremendous support throughout my recovery and even pre-dystonia too. So it's like rare to have those people in your life too who go throughout that whole process with you. And so I'm really glad that you spoke of your teachers as well having such a good influence on you.
Well, Roger Rocco says there's a growing army of us, that is, people who are getting the more psychological approach instead of the meat approach. I think I told you that you can run into people from IU and they're pretty thoroughly into the meat, and it's like you can't argue with them at all. They're completely convinced. Okay, well, I mean, they sound good, but what if you get into trouble? Your answers are not on your lips. Lips don't think, they react. So that's okay. I'm just going to keep doing that, and they can do what they do. And meanwhile, I have really good students.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say, if I ever have students, it's like I would rather them study with somebody who has, faced an injury or faced a disorder than not at all, just because they get it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and end our live chat here. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please post any questions or keep emailing them to me as well in my inbox there, and I'll forward them to Richard afterwards. Okay. And hello, Alan Ng. Hello, Becky, Jess Haney. Thank you, Jess, for joining. Carrie Schaefer, thank you so much. Christina Ramirez for tuning in. Franco Perfetti. I just named a couple people. Eddie Alaya. I just want to acknowledge you guys here since you were in the chat. All right, thank you all. Richard, thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Again, this recording will be available online afterwards in about an hour. Otherwise, I will eventually send it to you in a link form too. So, all right. See you, Richard.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Virtual hug.
Virtual hug.